Hello, everyone. Welcome to Realism, the lecture on realism. They also call it realpolitik. Realpolitik, you heard of it, right? REALPOLITIK, realpolitik. So, now let's talk about realism. There are two types of realism. By the way, before that, let me remind you, as I've said in the introduction lecture, realism is the most dominant theory in international relations. It is the oldest theory as well. It's been more than 2,000 years. The idea, you see the world as it is rather than what it ought to be as it is. Okay? So let's look at two types of realism. The first type is classical realism. Classical realism is from ancient times onwards, from Greece, from Thucydides. The man is spelled here. I'll go show you. Thucydides is how you spell. He's a historian who wrote the book called Peloponnesian War. I'm talking about more than 2,000 years ago in Greece. Remember the origin of democracy, everything came from Greece. So at the time there are city-states, city like New York City, city-states. What is the difference between modern state and a city-state? City-state is like modern states also, like city-state is Singapore. It's small, like New York City, imagine, has their own capacity to wage war, decide on foreign policy, which it cannot because it comes under the United States and the Washington decides it, right? The federal government. There, city-states are small cities which are states in itself, which has the power to decide on international relations. And Athens, yes, Athens, some people will call Athens, Athens, and Sparta. Have you seen the movie 300? The Spartans, we are Spartans, Sparta, Sparta, are city-states, and they have different type of governments. And the Athenians were improving economically because of trade. So, guess what happened? The Spartans looked at the Athenians and started to worry. Because of economics, they are improving. Why would that make them worry? They could get jealous that these guys are getting rich, but why worry? Yes, they were worried, the Spartans, that the Athenians could get richer and richer and then use that economic might to convert into military might. So, Thucydides in his book Peloponnesian War, Peloponnesian region, the Greek region, that region, Peloponnesian War, which is a war between Sparta and Athens, he said started because of fear of Spartans about the Athenians. Fear is a vital word in realism. Underline fear, because fear makes countries behave in ways that realism understands. That is, before even say now, if I have to say, China is growing, right? And economically and militarily also they are growing stronger and stronger. And so some scholars say that America should fight China now rather than wait. That's preventative war. It's ethically wrong. That's another argument opposite to what they're saying, but they are not talking about ethics, because in realism there's no ethics. It's all about what is right for the state, survival. Because Athenians got stronger, they could attack and destroy Sparta, so Sparta will stop to exist. So survival is at stake. Underline the word survival. So survival is a key factor. Another important word in realism, from classical realism, is selfish nature. Yeah, like selfish. States have to be selfish. And where does that come from? For classical realists like Thucydides and other names I'm going to discuss, it comes from human nature itself. Human nature is what? It's selfish, right? So when it's selfish, nature of humans, the states also behave in selfish nature. They want what? They want to be more powerful than others so that they don't get butchered by other states. So states try to accumulate power. And power, when they talk about, they're talking about military power. Military power is the key. My professor used to say, when push comes to shove, military might is the key. Military might. So what happened? You might say, well, Spartans and Athenians fought for years and years, and the Spartans finally destroyed Athens. Yes. Now, in this context, Thucydides, there is another important line from the Peloponnesian War, which I want you to remember. While this war is starting, the Athenians, because the glare, okay. The Athenians went and asked for alliance with a small island group of people called Melians. And it's called Melian dialogue. They will have dialogues. The Athenians will say, you have to join us in fight against Sparta. And the Melians are like, no, we don't want to join you. We want to be neutral. Leave us alone. And the Athens will say, no, you don't have the choice. When we say you have to join. And they will say, no, that's not right. That's not morally right. You can't force us. The Athenians would say, the strong does what it wants, and the weak must suffer. Keep that word, underline it. Strong does what it wants, and the weak must suffer. Because who is going to come and help Melians? The Athenians are stronger than the Melians. Melians is a small island. And guess what they would say? If you don't support us, we're going to destroy you. And the Athenians went on to destroy the Melians, killed all the men of fighting age, sold women and children into slavery. Yeah, it's brutal. That's what they did. And that is why Peloponnesian War, the history teaches us about international politics, politics among nations, how it's ruthless, it's brutal, and it's selfish, and fear drives many behaviors. Keep that in mind. And the next classical realist I want to introduce is Machiavelli. Machiavelli, you have probably heard of people saying, oh, he's a Machiavellian. And Niccolo Machiavelli, if I may spell it for you, Machiavelli, he is an Italian diplomat. I'm talking about in the 16th century. He lived in the same time as Da Vinci. Yes, the artist Da Vinci. Machiavelli is spelled. You probably heard of him from the book, small book he wrote, Machiavelli. Prince. He is a diplomat. And why we're studying about this guy who is dead and gone, and Thucydides? Because it gives you understanding of realism. Remember, the theory gives you an understanding of the world, current world affairs, and also the future. So in realism, according to Machiavelli, the word, underline this word, prudence, P-R-U-D-E-N-C-E. Prudence is vital for a country. You have to be prudent. A prince, in his book Prince, he talks about a prince should always prepare for war. If you want to seek peace, prepare for war. Even the sport activities of the prince during peace has to be like hunting, you would say, because it teaches you how to wage war. Interesting, isn't it? And there's another famous dictum. If a prince is chosen to be loved or feared by his own people, it is better to be feared than loved. Machiavelli's argument. It's better to be feared than loved. Why? Because the business of governance is ruthless. If people fear you, they're not going to go against you. Even if they love you, they might go against you. So it is all about real politics is ruthless, and prudent behavior is vital for states. I will use this prudence in an example context when I discuss about America in this lecture. The third classical realist, you should write it down, his name is Hobbes. Thomas, you know how to spell Thomas. Hobbes is H-O-B-B-E-S. He's about 100 years later. even though he's born in the same century when Machiavelli died, Hobbes died about 100 years later. So 17th century in England. Hobbes wrote a famous book called Leviathan. Leviathan. I'll spell it for you. Thomas Hobbes. Leviathan is talking about government. Leviathan is this big monster, sea monster, and he wrote this book, Government as a Big Monster. And in that he mentioned life is short. It's a famous line, underline this. Life is short, nasty, and brutish. Yeah, especially at the times, it is true. And they even say Hobbes was born in fear because he was pregnant. I mean, his mother was pregnant and he was in the stomach, and the military is going to invade. Enemies are going to invade England, they said, and he came out of fear. He talks about being a government in realistic fashion, to govern. Life is short, nasty, and brutish. All these guys, Thucydides, Hobbes, and Machiavelli, classical realism, they're talking about human nature. Human nature is fear-oriented and act accordingly. Otherwise, you could be destroyed. That is the state. States has to be cautious, prepare all the time for war, and are selfish, achieve more power. And the more power you have, the better the chances of your survival in an international arena, because no one else is going to come and help you. Are you following? The next group of realists are called, modern ones are classical realism. Classical structural realism. Classical realism is the one we discussed so far. Structural realism, structure, the word is international arena has structure, and there is no higher authority. Say, I'll give you an example. You're going on a dark alley, somebody robs you, then you could call later 911 because you have an authority to come and protect you or investigate the robbery. Whereas in international relations, when a country is getting attacked, it doesn't have a 911 call to call anyone for help. There is no higher authority to a state. The state has to defend itself. When the Nazis invaded Poland, Poland has to defend itself. And unfortunately, they were not able to, and the Nazis completely squished the Polish fighters and ruthlessly ruled Poland. I mean, this is one modern example. You go thousands of years, it's the same. You saw in Melian dialogue what happened to Melians to the Athenians. Athenians, you think the good guys. There's not good guy, bad guy. Everybody behaves in a selfish manner. That's how realists see it, and based on history of behaviors of states. So there's no in the structure, there's no higher authority. You follow it? And nation states are always vying for power. And in structural realism, they say they vying for power so that more power means they could say stay peaceful. Now I'm going to introduce a scholar who is well known as let me write his name. Well known in the field of structural realism, Morgenthau. Hans Morgenthau, H-A-N-S. He's an American diplomat, Hans Morgenthau. After World War II, he wrote a book called Politics Among Nations. It's still in print, and it's profoundly, he has affected lives. So Morgenthau says there are only 3 different policies countries do. 3 different policies. The first type of policy he's talking about is policy of status quo. Write it down. I'm going to name the 3 and I'm going to explain to you. Policy of status quo. The next one is policy of prestige, or put policy of prestige 3. Number 2, policy of imperialism. Policy of imperialism. And policy of prestige is number 3. So now, what does the first one mean? The policy of status quo. if I'm a country, you're a country, and I like the relationship which we have, either as equal, mutual, or you being in a subordinate position, then I would maintain the policy of status quo. I'm not trying to change the relationship. So that relationship, whatever we have, will be classified into policy of status quo, maintaining the status quo. Whereas policy of imperialism, the second one, is trying to achieve power, trying to achieve more power. And there are three types of imperialism, policy of imperialism. Write it down. Economic imperialism, military imperialism, and cultural imperialism. These are the three different types of imperialism. Let me talk about military imperialism. Military imperialism is the good old-fashioned one, which is, if I want to change the power dynamics between you and me, I am using, say I'm the leader of a country and you're leader of a country, using my military to occupy your country. The British did during their big empire business in the 19th century, right? They ruled. The sun never sets in the British Empire, they said. They ruled many countries, occupied militarily, sent troops, and also hired locals to be part of their military. Like in India, they hired many Indians to be the sipais, soldiers, and govern. That is an imperialism, a military imperialism. Okay. Nowadays, you don't see that much, even though here and there you do, because like Saddam Hussein, in the 1990s, occupied Kuwait. Iraq, Saddam Hussein went and occupied Kuwait, saying that, oh, this is another province of us. A sovereign country, Kuwait, was occupied by Saddam Hussein. The US and Russia and other countries joined together, kicked Saddam Hussein out by a war because he didn't want to get out. Now, Putin occupied Crimea, which belonged to Ukraine, and another country's land, boom, he militarily occupied. Nobody kicked him out. He still has it. Russia has it. Crimea, right? So not always it will succeed in other countries joining to kick it out. So the point is that that's a military imperialism, directly occupying and taking over. And you might ask, one simple way to see why do they countries want more land? Well, exploitation, of course, but also countries want to grow their boundary far and far. This is a geopolitics 101, geopolitics 101. If this is my capital and this is my country size, I want to be larger, occupy more lands nearby. Why? Because if somebody wants to invade and come and attack me, it takes a while to come to the capital. If my country is small, like say Israel, which is about the size of New Jersey, it's easily could be overrun. That's why Israel is one reason it's in high alert, because many times they face the threat of existence. United States have Washington, and people have suggested to move Washington capital further into the country. But United States is lucky in some ways because it has two oceans on the side and two weak powers on the top and bottom, Mexico and Canada, Pacific, Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. So United States doesn't need to worry as much as other countries which are close to Pakistan and India. Anytime China and India, at least China and India has a barrier of Himalayas. Okay, are you following? Military imperialism. I will come back to geography in this lecture. Economic imperialism is using economic might to change power, gain more power. So I am using my economic might to improve my power relative to you. Countries are struggling to achieve power, relative power. It's a zero-sum game. In realism, zero-sum game means I gain, you lose. You gain, I lose. It's not like we both gain and we both win. Zero-sum game. So I am trying to achieve power. If I take away your land, you're going to lose land. There's only limitation. There's not plenty land to go forever and ever. So I take your land, you will lose land. Crimea, Ukraine lost Crimea. Russia took it. So Economic imperialism is using economic means. So some scholars would argue IMF, International Monetary Fund, which was created after World War II, okay, and which is an international economic institution, and World Bank to alleviate poverty, which is in DC, created after World War II. It's all Bretton Woods system. Don't worry if you don't understand these words. You will learn a little more of it during globalization lecture. Right now, just follow. And people say United States and the Western countries use these systems, economic systems, to beat down on poor countries. That's an economic imperialism. Dollar, US dollar is the world currency. So we use that to wield power, economic power over other countries. And so that is economic imperialism. Okay? And then the third one is cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism is dominating other cultures, using your culture, saying that your culture is better than others in many ways, whichever you want to project. So, for example, the US promotes its culture around the world. For example, I could use, coming from India, right? Hollywood movies are shown in India, now in China, and many countries. And through that cultural prominence, that US is like a very powerful country, and US culture, what it values, the type of food, McDonald's and others, fast food restaurants, now is in India. And well, it has its detriments, like fast foods. It's been well noted that it creates obesity and diseases. So, but people think it's a cool thing. In fact, it's expensive to take a date on McDonald's in India. Then here, if you take it, it's not a fancy date. And so young people think that Western ideas, Western culture is the best one to follow. So they wear jeans, Levi's jeans and others in India. Where did jeans start? It started in California during gold rush time for the miners. And now everybody wears it around the world. That's a cultural imperialism. You're putting your culture on top of others. And this consumerism also, which is a Western way, multinational companies going around the world and to sell more and more products, because people think that is the way to happiness. And that is a cultural idea of the Western world. And we'll talk about that more in globalization. But that is a cultural imperialism. Are you following? Amazon is now in India and taking over all the small businesses. Yes, Amazon India. Even for my mom, I buy products from Amazon India from here, and it gets delivered to her in India, at her home, whatever she wants. The point is, cultural imperialism happens with the power, relative power increase. So you understand this. And the third one in policies, policy of prestige. Okay, I finished policy of imperialism, 3. Policy of prestige. In policy of prestige, a country behaves in a way that it will show off. It's basically showing off. It's for prestige. It's not maintaining status quo. But let me give you an example, then you would understand it better. Teddy Roosevelt, he was president during 1901 to 1988, right? And more than 120 years ago. When he was president, he created a fleet, naval fleet called White Fleet, and he sent them around the world to Japan and other places. Why? Why would you put fuel in these ships and send them around? It is to show, hey, United States is the new power. Watch out. It's like the guys in the hood. Check us out. They're driving the car. And it bounces, all these things. It's a policy of prestige. It is to prevent other countries from taking us easily and provoking a war possibly. So it is, because at the time, Great Britain is the most powerful country in the world. And the US is economically big, but it's not gained foothold to show the world that it is the biggest power. Of course, it all changed after World War II. United States became the number one military power in the world. Okay, are you following? Now, so you understand these three areas of policies. Now let's discuss what Morgenthau talks about. How do you understand a country's power? How do you gauge or understand a country is powerful? What's the most powerful country in the world? Tell me. Some would say United States. Some would say China. Is that really? Some would say the United States is by far the most powerful country in the world. And why is that? And during Cold War, some thought Soviet Union is the most powerful country. Let's see how you say that. What parameters you use to measure that. The first one, I'm going to list some parameters. It's not the end of the list, but the main ones I'm going to discuss. Because of the time, I cannot go in detail. Otherwise, this realism alone, you could teach for an entire course on it. There's offensive realism, defensive realism, all these things. But if you go to graduate school, you will learn all that. Here, let's understand that in realism, especially, what means for a country to be powerful? Geography. Let's start with that. One, geography. What's geography has to do with the power of a country? Oh, it does. Remember I told you the United States is blessed with two weak powers, Canada and Mexico. You think Canada and Mexico are going to fight the United States? With both hands tied to the back, it could defeat both of them at the same time. You think the fish in Atlantic and Pacific Ocean is going to invade America? No, it's a great geographical position to be not surrounded by big threats. For example, Germany and France fought wars. They're constantly worried. World War I, World War II, right? Remember? And even before that, Franco-Prussian War, 19th century, all this, they have fought many wars. And so you go to India and Pakistan, China and India has fought one war, India and Pakistan has fought 3 wars. Anywhere close to another country which is equally powerful or almost close is dangerous, okay? Because countries are trying to increase their power relative to you. And that's why wars start out of fear. Even if your economic might is increasing, like Athenians, and you will start a war, right? So United States geographically advantageous. The larger your country, the more strategic depth. Write down the word strategic depth. That's why I told you Israel doesn't have much strategic depth because it's the size of the state of New Jersey. Which country has large landmass? Russia. Soviet Union had even bigger landmass because it had more countries part of it. Now, despite losing all those countries, Russia has a top landmass, number 1, 11 time zones. Yeah, huge country. And so, for example, Napoleon, Hitler, all those guys who invaded Russia failed. Not because the Russians got to defeat them, well, they did militarily as well, but they have a strategic advantage. When Napoleon went in, they just retreated. They didn't engage him directly. After then they came and when he was returning back in the cold, they were engaging him. That's a whole different conversation. But advantage of geography is wonderful. If Israel is invaded, if they don't stand up and fight, they cannot retreat. Where are they going to retreat? Into the ocean? So you understand? Large landmass. Countries want more. Despite that large landmass, Putin wants Crimea. Well, that's also a geographical reason because it has warm water ports. So other areas of Russia is frozen in the winter, but warm water ships for military. Yeah. Okay. Other than geography, what else? By the way, natural barriers are good. Like I told you, between China and India, one of the natural barrier is Himalayas, which prevents them from fighting. Otherwise, they would have fought more wars. Okay, in the 1960s, they fought a war. Since then, skirmishes happened, even recently, but not a war. Geography plays a role. That you had to be blessed. Second, The country has to be blessed. Second one is military preparedness. Military preparedness. A country has to be militarily prepared, ready for war anytime. America, when it was founded, they don't want a standing army because they're worried, the people were worried the military will be used against the people. Americans didn't want. But more and more the country power grew. It built a strong military, trained and ready to go. Not just in the country, we have more military bases around the world than any other country to project power anytime, anywhere. That's a global superpower. Other countries don't have. We have 100 plus military naval ports where we could project military power anytime, in any region. Are you following? Military preparedness. Whereas when World War II started and Hitler invaded Poland, United States was like 16th in military ranking. It's not strong militarily. And they were training with horses. Can you imagine going with horses against the military tanks? Well, the Polish did. They were all killed. Sad. Military preparedness is vital. And countries' power is estimated. That's why you wouldn't consider Switzerland to be a strong military power, or Costa Rica, which does not have a military. Then you wouldn't call it as it's a powerful country, really. Size, geography, military preparedness. Third one, write it down. Population. Why population? Yes, usually students answer economic might. Comes from population. Because if you don't have a large population, money is not going to be generated through work, right? I'll talk about that next in economics. So population is also for fighting. In a war situation, you need soldiers, right? If you're a small country like Israel, Singapore, that's why they have mandatory service, military service, because they don't have many people to defend the country unless it's mandatory. 3 years you have to serve. United States is a large country. They have enough recruitment. They also recruit in poor regions where people don't have an option to improve their life. So military not military preparedness. I lost my chain of thought. Population. And in population, Japan is now strong in that factor, population. Why? Because the aging population. You want youth bulge. What do you mean youth bulge? If you put the population, all of them together, most of it you want to be youthful, because you want youth to fight wars. 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 70-year-old. If you give a gun like in Japan, many centenarians, large population go over 70s. Grandpa, don't shoot there. You don't want grandpa to be going to war. You want young people. So in that way, China is also aging population. European countries, a lot of them are aging. India has a youth bulge. Iran has a youth bulge. So in that factors, if you measure, they will have powerful countries in that way. But of course, that is not enough, just because you need geography, you need military preparedness, you need economics, money. What is your GDP? Gross domestic product. That's how it's measured, right? GDP is vital in order for you to know whether economically the country is doing well or not. And that decides whether a country can convert that economic might to military might. Fareed Zakaria, I don't know whether you watch CNN, he has a show, and when he was getting his PhD, he wrote a doctoral dissertation, and which later became a book, which talks about wealth to power, how America converted its economic might to military might. Remember I told you World War II, it was slow. When the beginning of the World War II, America's rank was so low. And within the end of the war, few years later, America became number one. How? Because it converted its economic might to military might. It started producing cars and produced tanks and airplanes. That was used for military warfare. We outproduced airplanes than all the other countries, allies and enemies fighting together. Yes, the Japan had a better aircraft in the beginning, zero. Then we started producing tanks, Sherman tanks and others, which was not as good as the German tanks, but you could shoot down as many tanks as you want. We're going to outproduce you. We had the economic might. So economics plays a role. All towards war, towards fighting geography, population, military preparedness, and economics, GDP. And another one, type of government. Type of government. What type of government do you have? If it's an authoritarian government, it's perceived as, if I'm a dictator, I don't need the consent of my people. I could go to war. It's tired today morning. Let me go to war. I could decide. Not in a democracy. You want Congress to declare war. Yes, since World War II, the presidents have been taking the country to war. That is a different discussion, but you're talking about in general in democracies, you have to convince the people that this war is worth fighting. A dictator doesn't need to. They could just go to war. Like Hitler, if you are, your people follow wherever you go to war. And Hitler took them to ruin, took Germany to ruin, utter destruction, right? That's the problem, the type of government. And it's also said, you will learn that in liberalism, democracies usually don't fight each other. It's between democracy and authoritarian countries. Isn't that interesting? We'll learn about that in the next lecture. So it is vital what type of government you have. The last one, natural resources. Write it down. Natural resources is whether your country have natural resources or to make steel, iron, war-making machines need all kinds of things. Coal, because fuel, oil, timber, you name it. Even molybdenum, a small element, could make a difference because when it's added to the cannons, it'll make sure it won't get heated and frozen. Boom, boom, boom. You're hitting with cannonballs. Iron alone will not prevent it from overheating. It needs molybdenum, and that came from Latin America for the Germans. Simple materials can change the course of war. Uranium, for example. Uranium used in nuclear bomb. The US got its uranium from, that's right, from Congo, Africa. So, natural resources, what you have. Do you have a vast land of natural resources? Then you don't need to depend on other countries to supply. You could manufacture those, and to fight a war. Are you following? Realist, how they assess the country's power. Now, let's look at what Morgenthau says. This is a very important words. You should know this because it's used often in newspapers, everything. Balance of power. I'll define it. Balance of power. By the way, balance of power is a natural tendency of states. Okay? It's a natural tendency of states. Let me explain balance of power to you. Say there are 5 countries. Okay? In balance of power is in a peaceful situation, these 5 countries are in equilibrium. There's an equilibrium. They're in peace. Say one of these countries suddenly become more powerful. These guys, what happens? They are neighbors. What will happen? They will start to worry about it because he becomes powerful. He could destroy each of them. So what do you think these 4 guys would do if this guy started getting powerful? Yeah. You're asking how he got powerful? Say he started building his military. Like now China is doing, and Vietnam is worried, and all the small countries around China are worried by China's economic aggression. Military. Even India is worried. What do you think they will do? They will start joining together. That is one. Alliances they could do. Okay? And that is one way. Write down types of balance of power. Types of balance of power is alliances. Okay? I'll complete the definition because I have to explain this and then I'll do it. Alliances they form together so that this guy alone cannot destroy one another. So if they form alliances, if this guy attacks him, they all come together to attack him. Are you following? It's alliances. I'll come to the other types of balance of power. So balance of power is states naturally have the tendency. In peace, there is an equilibrium among states. And when one state becomes powerful, the equilibrium is dislodged. It's dislodged. And to achieve the equilibrium again, the state's natural tendency is to balance the power of the Raja power of this is balanced by the states by different means. One of the means is alliances. I'll talk about the other means. Without destroying any of the elements, any of the states, because you don't want to lose your life. Survival is important. So you stay in power by bringing the equilibrium back. This guy, say, like Caesar, Caesar kids, suddenly a big kid sits here, it goes, it's not equilibrium, dislodged. Now to bring back to this, what happens? You have to hit heavier too. Maybe you could ask two people to sit here, then it'll come here. How about that? You understand? So that's how states balance power, like a seesaw. So that it's in equilibrium, you won't fight. If you're equal power, it'll be a distraction for this if it starts the fight. It starts, it's going to attack back. If it's weak, it could get destroyed. So in order to prevent all the four guys, they will achieve power equal or more than this guy who just got more power. One way is alliance. Write down the second method, okay, is compensation. Compensation is money, getting money from other countries. So when the Nazis started threatening the Europe, then they started occupying one by one all the European countries. UK, United Kingdom, Britain was alone. They asked for help from America. Americans were not willing to go and help militarily, like supply troops or anything. But they did help through sending money or materials which they need. Lend-Lease Act. Are you following? So then the UK is in a better footing to balance Germany. So that's compensation. Another one is armaments. Third one, armaments is, okay, this guy got stronger, I will build military too. I'll build military weapons. So Britain started building a lot of weapons. Along with the US, they built the atomic bomb to defeat Nazi Germany. That's how atomic bomb was created. And radar, so many technologies came out of it. It's because of the necessity. Okay, are you following? Okay, good. And there's another fourth one in balance of power, divide and rule. Divide and rule. I'll give you an example and you'll understand. When the British came to India, they are a small country compared to Indian landmass. By the way, India, when the British came, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, all of them are one big country. But it's not like one joint country. It was ruled by multiple kings and things. If they know the British from somewhere coming to occupy the entire thing, all these guys joined together, they're going to kick the British out. But the British created the division among them to rule. Divide and rule, divide and conquer. It's a balance of power. Joined together, these guys could kick out Britain, but divided, Britain could take out one by one, which is what they did. Now, peace through limitations. Write it down. Peace through limitations. Morgenthau is saying how countries cannot achieve peace. The whole thing about realism theory is to understand why countries want more power. More power means peace. Then nobody will kill me. I could be strong. So, peace through limitations. What are the methods that peace cannot be achieved? One, write it down. Disarmament. So you and I are two countries. You have nuclear weapons, I have nuclear weapons, and we sign a deal to disarm. Say, eliminate nuclear weapons. How do I know that you for sure given up your nuclear weapons? You might have hidden it somewhere, thinking that you have given up and I give up my nuclear weapons. Then you come to war with me and you have nuclear weapons. That's going to be very dangerous for me, right? This puts my country in a risk of destruction. So Morgenthau says, disarmament doesn't work. You cannot trust on treaties. You sign a treaty between two countries to disarm. He doesn't trust that. Realists don't trust. The second idea, collective security. He doesn't believe in collective security either. Collective security is like when North Korea invaded South Korea in the 1950s. Yeah, many countries joined under the banner of UN to go and kick out North Korea from South Korea, but many countries didn't join the band too. Like India didn't go and fight North Korea out of South Korea. So collective security doesn't work. It goes back to the idea of you're on your own, buddy. There's no 911 call. You have to fight your freaking own war. You better get strong. You better get powerful. You better get militarily top-notch, tip-top. Military preparedness, all those things we discuss. Are you following? So collective security doesn't work. What about judicial actions? Third one, judicial actions. That is, how about I take you to court. You're a powerful country and you did wrong. I'm taking you to International Court of Justice. Well, this is not like a regular court. International Court of Justice, we both have to voluntarily go there. And whatever the judgment is given, you could comply to that or you don't need to. You could walk away. They cannot force you. Like for in modern court, if you take me to court and or I take you to court and I win the case, whatever the judge says, it will be enforced. If you have to give me money, the judge says, you better, otherwise the government can dip into your account. But not in International Court of Justice. It's changing. Wait till liberalism. International Criminal Court is coming, which is punishing, violating sovereignty and going in and tricking people and punishing. Changing. But in realism, all this time, Morgenthau is correct. By judicial actions, you can. Let's talk about peace through transformation. Another, leave those three. That's for limitations for peace. Peace through limitations. Peace through transformation. How about a world government under that peace through transformation? Let's transform the world. Let's all have one world government so we don't fight each other. Yeah? Good idea? Realists don't believe in it. You know why? Because the small countries won't join the world government. You know why? Because they won't have a voice. The big guys will have the voice. The small guys, Thailand or Singapore or Vietnam is not going to have as much voice as US, even India, China, Russia. No, they're tiny countries. Nobody will hear to them. Is the idea that it won't work to achieve peace. But there's one way. You might think there's any way that you could achieve peace. Yes, there's one way for sure will work to achieve peace, and that is through diplomacy, and they call it peace through peace through accommodation. Peace through accommodation. That's diplomacy. Using diplomatic means, you could achieve peace. Diplomacy is like a chess. Step by step, you could achieve peace. Okay? The bird sound, excuse me. And Morgenthau says why you could achieve diplomacy power. Because you could use different tools. Okay? Let me explain about that when I talk about George F. Kennan. Okay? Let's talk about another, just like Hans Morgenthau, another American who is a realist who still lives. He's very old, but he's alive and he's still thinking. He was in the height of power in 1970s, 73, 74. He was Secretary of State, National Security Advisor. Yes, it's Henry Kissinger. Kissinger, Kissinger. Henry, you know how to spell. He's a German immigrant, became a professor at Harvard, and went on to become an advisor to Richard Nixon. Okay? And Henry Kissinger, wrote a book called, many books he has written. One is called Diplomacy. In that he talks about how Teddy Roosevelt is a realist. Remember the guy who sent the White Fleet? Yes, he's a realist. Why? Because when there were war between countries, he makes sure that he doesn't help one side, that the other takes a top. It indirectly helps the other. Yeah. Henry Kissinger wrote a dissertation on continental realism. Continental realism means focusing on the European continent. Okay? He's focusing on the era of Napoleon Bonaparte. Remember the guy? Napoleon Bonaparte, dictator, crowned himself as the emperor of France in the early 19th century. He came from nowhere. Yes. And he was a military genius. He just defeated one power after another. And it is hard to defeat him in the battlefield. But Austria, another country, slowly, it had a brilliant diplomat who did diplomacy. What did he do? He got the Austrian monarch's daughter to marry the French Emperor Napoleon. Okay? So he took the country to peace, and peace to negotiation, neutrality. Giving through marriage, join. Then, so now you're allies. From moving from alliances to neutrality. Okay? Neutrality. Then from neutrality to negotiations. Second stage. From negotiations to war. Third stage. And he fought and defeated Napoleon. How did he defeat? Austria is a small country, France. And he's a military genius, Napoleon. How did he defeat? While he is building the relationship with Napoleon, he built alliances, quadruple, four countries, Britain, Russia, Prussia, all these countries joined together and crushed, and Austria, of course, joined together, crushed Napoleon in the battlefield. The final one was the Waterloo. Leipzig, there was a battle. Now, by defeating him, they came together and created a convention, Congress of Vienna, in 1814, 1815, that created peace in Europe for 100 years until World War I, 1914. 100 years they created a peace through realism. So realism is not about like dark. It's about like perpetual war. It's actually trying to achieve peace. And Henry Kissinger wrote about it, how Metternich, Austrian diplomat, did that through diplomacy in his thesis, dissertation. It's a very engaging book, and you would understand. And he used that same type of policies when he was in power. Of course, it had a lot of setbacks and other things, but it also opened the path for U.S. to build a relationship with communistic China. Did you follow it? You had to read, it's 840-page book, Henry Kissinger's Diplomacy. I could talk about that in detail, but we don't have time. I'm looking at the time. Let me bring another scholar, last one, modern scholar. This one, in the 20th century, is vital for US to fight the Cold War. That's why I want to end with him. His name is George F. Kennan. George F. Kennan. Kennan is spelled Kennan. Kennan. He is an American, went to Princeton University, but he had great insight about the Russians. He lived in Russia, he spoke the language frequently. He was an ambassador during the Cold War time to Russia. Okay, he wrote a book called American Diplomacy, and he takes a critical look at American foreign policy and tells the mistakes America has done and why it shouldn't have been done. One of them he talks about is that America shouldn't have gone to war with Spain, especially we shouldn't have taken over the Philippines in the 19th century, end of 19th century. Cuba was governed by the Spain, and American ship was there in the Havana harbor in Cuba. It exploded. American people thought it was exploded and destroyed by the Spaniards who ruled the Cubans. So Americans want to have a war with Spain, even though the president at the time, Henry McKinley, did not want to go to war. But the Assistant Secretary of War, Theodore Roosevelt, triggered a war with Spain and even took over Philippines. We ruled Philippines, the US. We talk like, oh, we don't have colonies. We had Philippines as a colony for a long time. We did tortures, waterboarding, all these things, nasty things there. He says it's not prudent. Remember Niccolo Machiavelli's word prudent? Prudence, look up in dictionary. It's not prudent because it's not in the national interest of the United States to go and occupy Philippines. It's a bad move. So that man, George F. Kennan, because I'm coming into time closure for this lecture, have an idea and wrote a telegram when he was the ambassador in Soviet Union, a long telegram, because it was a long one. It's called long telegram, read by all the State Department people. He wrote, the Soviet Union, the World War II is over, there's only two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, and he's writing about how to deal with Soviet Union. He said, America don't need to be afraid of Soviet Union as like they will start an immediate war. They're not going to. But they will put pressure like a water in a dam, like perpetual pressure in America. How to deal with that problem, he says, is America should not just depend on military, it should deal with the threat, Soviet threat, using military, diplomacy, culture, economic, all the four types. And his ideas were coined into one word called containment. The threat of perpetual war should be contained rather than we should be prepared to fight a big war with Soviet Union. And the containment policy, which he wrote, was picked up by then Harry Truman, who was the president post-World War II. NSC 68, they created, you don't need to remember these numbers, a National Security Council article, how to deal with the Soviet Union threat. And after Harry Truman, the presidents who came, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Richard Nixon, all these people use the Kennan's idea as a boilerplate and changed a little bit for their purposes, like flexible response by Kennedy, flexible response. They use this idea of containment to contain the Soviet Union. And Kennan was so clairvoyant in thought that he said, if we do this, the Soviet Union will implode. It will collapse on its own weight. And it did. By the early 1990s, it did. It failed. And Kennan gave us the blueprint. That's a realist who sees as it is and gives us a guidance. So now you have the tools through this lecture, how states behave, and how you could make counter moves to survive and thrive in peace. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. I'll see you in the next one. Good luck.